Men are good, as are you. And today we're going to talk about lies. We're going to talk about feminist lies. Because for the past 50 years, feminists have been bending, breaking, or omitting the truth. And nobody says anything. It reminds me of Chicken Little. Chicken Little, oh, sky's falling, the sky's falling. And after a while, people go, oh, no, we're not going to believe Chicken Little. But people keep believing feminists, even after 50 years of lies. It seems to me that feminists really have been abusing the trust that our society has put into women. At any rate, we're going to talk about lies, both an old one and some new ones. And it's important for us to really get a sense of these lies because we need to call them out. We need to not let Chicken Little throw everybody into chaos like they've been doing for 50 years. So let's see what we're going to do. Yep, feminists lie. And they do so in ways that are difficult for most people to detect. This leaves people convinced that they're truthful and only interested in equality, but scratch and sniff, and you get a very different odor. Let's look at an old lie. How many times have you heard the phrase that 1.3 million women were victims of domestic violence in the United States? Plenty, right? Yeah, and guess what? There's research to back up those claims. The research clearly states that they estimate that 1.3 million women were physically assaulted by an intimate partner in the U.S. The research added on an additional 200,000 rape victims to say that 1.5 million women were either raped or physically assaulted. This phrase was spread around the internet far and wide. It was used and is still used by advocates to prove women were victims and needed support and services. It was also used to show how many men were abusing women. But guess what? That very same research said something else that they conveniently omitted. It said that 834,000 men were also victims of the same domestic violence as the women. So, this very same research showed that men were about 40% of those victimized by an intimate partner. Here's the actual text from the research. According to survey estimates, approximately 1.5 million women and 834,700 men are raped and or physically assaulted by an intimate partner annually in the United States. So, what did they do here? They simply only told part of the story. Telling only about female victims and omitting males was meant to shape a narrative, and this is what you see them doing over and over again, omitting important information to make it look like women are victims and men are the problem. The truth is less important than the narrative. This is a form of lying, and when it comes to such critical information, it's hideous. This study and its omissions were in the late 20th century. So have things gotten better or worse? What do you think? Here's a new way to lie. Enter the OECD. Here's how they describe themselves. The Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development, OECD, is an international organization that works to build better policies for better lives. Our goal is to shape policies that foster prosperity, equality, opportunity, and well-being for all. And when they say shape policies, you better believe they're talking about making things better for women. This organization has been doing reports on what they call gender well-being for some time. The latest is the Gender Well-Being 2020 report. The report surveys 36 countries and evaluates them on aspects of their gender equality. Meet Kara Fleischer. She's the narrator of the video linked below that reports on the Gender Equality Report for the OECD. Let's have a look and see if Ms. Fleischer is telling the whole story, just a part of it, or is working to shape a narrative. This graphic appears early in the presentation, and it is a doozy. It claims to show the distance from parity for men and women, with the midline running through the middle of the chart equal to 1 and indicating parity between men and women. The farther you are up or down from the line, the less the parity. The pink circles below the parity line are men doing better, and the blue circles above are women doing better. Now, briefly glancing at this chart, it looks like men and women have it about equal. The advantages of both seem to be about the same distance from the parity line, and each has 5 circles. It looks even, right? Wrong. Most people would never bother to look closely at this, but let's have a closer look. Okay, let's look at the pink balloons. The first says that men are doing better since they work fewer unpaid hours. The OECD data says that women do nearly 3 times more unpaid work than men. They say unpaid work consists of housework, shopping, and caring for the family. I wrote to the OECD folks and asked them for the survey questions they asked to come to that conclusion. I know you won't be surprised to hear that they never got back to me. My worry was that some time use surveys simply failed to ask about the masculine unpaid work to include, things like mowing the lawn, cleaning the gutters, getting up on a ladder, that sort of thing. In fact, the U.S. Department of Labor said in a 2019 report that included masculine chores that women do about 2.6 hours of unpaid work daily, while men do 2.0. If we applied that rate to this chart, the unpaid work category would be more like 0.77, and that would move it up quite a bit toward the parity line. Makes you wonder. Next is depressive symptoms, where they say that men have an advantage since they have fewer depressive symptoms. You have to dig a bit to find the actual values for this. I found that the result of 0.67 describes 8% of women being depressed versus 5% of men being depressed. Not a small difference, but also not so large. This value of 0.67 is not so far from the line of parity. Neither of these seems to be a significant advantage or disadvantage and not terribly important. Okay, men are a little less depressed and work a little less unpaid work. Then the next pink balloon is even closer to parity. That one claims that men have an advantage due to their feeling safer than women. The value on the chart describes their data that says that 79% of men feel safe compared to 62% of women. Again, not a huge difference, but not tiny either. Then comes employment rate, which shows men to be slightly more likely to be employed than women. The distance from parity again is very small. Then last for the men is earnings, where they portray a man's tiny distance from parity in the amount he earns. So far, this data seems unremarkable and unconvincing of any significant advantages or disadvantages for either sex. Then comes the crazy stuff. Note that the first blue balloon showing women's advantage seems very close to the line of parity. The claim is that women are advantaged by getting more support. Here we can see the spin. It's not that men need or are denied or somehow lack social support. No, it's that women have an advantage in getting more. See how they spin it? This is the theme of this chart, to never show anyone, and especially men, being at a disadvantage. Notice the title is Lack of Social Support, but the female advantage is they get more. Better to simply say that women have an advantage. See how that works? Here's an example for you. More men are crushed by a trash compactor, and women aren't. Therefore, women have an advantage. Oh, God. By focusing on the female advantage, you lose sight of the male disadvantage. Then comes the social interactions blue circle, which is probably more crazy than the unpaid work category. This balloon claims women have an advantage since they socialize more. How much more? We'll get into that in a minute. It's pretty nutty. But next it gets a little more serious. The claim is that women have an advantage since they work less paid hours. No, it's not that men are busting their ass and working more paid hours than women. It frames it such that women have an advantage by working less. Really? This trend is continued with the next category of deaths of despair, where again women have an advantage by not committing suicide or overdosing. This crazy survey sees men's suicide not as a disadvantage for men. No, it sees it as an advantage for women. This is where this sleight of hand becomes lethal. Got to give them high marks for creativity in hiding men's hardships. This only gets worse with the next category of homicide victims. The value is likely 4.0, but it's hard to tell since the moderator's picture blocks out the number. So women are far less likely to be murdered, and this is seen as their advantage rather than a disadvantage for men. Holy crap. As an aside, it's worth noting that women tend to feel less safe while men tend to be murdered and assaulted far more. Go figure. Note that both male and female advantages on this chart are within the same sized areas and seem about equal. So the chart does numerous things. 1. It fails to address men's true disadvantages and focuses men's advantages on insignificant parameters. No mention of the fact that men are routinely genitally mutilated, die in wars, have shorter lives, or die on the job much more often, and on and on and on. Nope, those just get overlooked. 2. It hides the men's actual disadvantages by labeling them as women's advantages. And 3, lastly, it skews the data by failing to have the graph truly represent the distance from parity. Here's a look at a chart that more accurately portrays the distance from the parity midline. Just a quick glance at this more accurately portrayed chart begins to tell the actual story. Now we can start to see the distance from parity of the men's disadvantages. Whether you want to call them women's advantages or men's disadvantages, they show how far apart we are on just a few of the issues that were chosen by the OECD. If the questionable unpaid work was moved up to a more likely spot, like here, the entire list of male advantages would be very close to parity. But look to the right and see that the last 3 advantages of less paid work, deaths of despair, and homicide are where the differences are most pronounced. These last 3 are also much more powerful indicators of well-being than any of the previous 7. So, the most potent disadvantages of men are where the differences between men and women are the greatest. The original chart didn't really help in showing that. But wait, let's go a step farther. Let's add in some male disadvantages in well-being that the OECD conveniently omitted. How about dying on the job? 13 times more men die on the job. That goes off the chart. Don't you think that dying in wars would impact your sense of well-being? 32 times more men die in wars. That goes way off the chart. Or how about being genitally mutilated? Who knows how many more times more males are genitally mutilated? I've conservatively guessed 100 times, but it's more likely that it's greater than that. By the way, 100 times was too large a difference to fit on this graphic. It becomes obvious that men are profoundly disadvantaged compared to women, but notice how the original report worked hard to disguise this. But there's more. Wouldn't your well-being be impacted by living 5 years less than the other sex? Or how about not having any reproductive rights? Or maybe getting 62% longer sentences for the same crime, or being subjected to a family court system that removes you from the children you love for no good reason, or living in a culture where your group gets significantly less understanding and empathy than women. And wouldn't it impact your sense of well-being if it was your sex that was continuously bashed and blamed for the problems of the world? It should be clear that the report is a sham and is intentionally working to portray a narrative that shows women to be at a disadvantage. Seems clear to me, right? Okay, let's go to the next page. This next one takes a slightly different approach in minimizing the hardships men face. It discusses what they call the deaths of despair. By this, they're referring to suicide, homicide, and overdoses. This is supposed to be a talk about sex differences and advantages and disadvantages, but when men face the obvious disadvantage, there's no data to show that to be the case. Look at the chart and notice there's no gender breakdown of these deaths, only totals. Just look at the picture of both a man and a woman. Seems to me that the woman in the picture is surrounded by more bottles and pills, and all the while she's only 20% of the deaths? Narrative painting 101. Men, of course, are the vast majority of those deaths, and they, in fact, do admit in one short sentence on the right sidebar that appears briefly near the conclusion of this slide that men do experience these types of death more often than women. But in the same breath, they add a but to the sentence by adding a caveat. Listen to what she says about this.
That although almost 4 times more men than women die of such death of despair, the number of women that fall victim to such fatalities has actually risen compared to 2010 in more than 1/3 of OECD countries. So there's some concerning pattern going on here that deserves much further research going forward.
So there's some concerning pattern going on here that deserves much more research going forward. Is that what she said? What is she talking about? It seems she's saying that the pattern of more women in the minority of countries are increasingly dying deaths of despair is what deserves more research? Really? The fact that men are 80% and have been for ages doesn't deserve research attention? Wow. Just wow. Misandry on parade. The last bit of irritation with this section is that the moderator started off by downplaying deaths of despair as being less significant since they were only 2% of the total deaths, and then added that those deaths are basically an indicator of mental illness. This is what you get when it's men who are dying. Oh, and then comes the gender pay gap. Notice that this chart, unlike the previous chart, does show the perceptions of the differences between men and women. Ms. Fleischer starts off by saying, it's not news that men earn more than women, on average 13% more. Oh boy, yes, using the median income to fake discrimination. Pfft, nothing to see here, folks. Just move along. Then the next section, she starts by saying, we know who gets paid more, but who works more is the next question. And she then makes the claim that when you total paid and unpaid work, that women work 24 minutes a day longer than men. But wait a minute. The data shows that men work longer hours of paid work in every country they surveyed. No mention that women need to work more paid hours, only that men need to work more unpaid hours. I wrote to the OECD and asked what questions were asked to determine unpaid work, but they haven't responded, and I'm not sure they ever will. The literature only mentions housework, going to the store, and caring for family members. I'm willing to bet that they didn't ask about the outside work routinely done by men, like cleaning the gutters, mowing the lawn, getting up on a ladder, etc., etc., etc. Something tells me that those just didn't see the light of day. Oh, and no mention of the time it takes for men to be the marital bodyguard, as Warren Farrell pointed out years ago. At any rate, they go on and on and on about this 25 minutes a day, and just look at the picture. It shows a man simply carrying a briefcase, while the woman carries a briefcase, a baby, a vacuum cleaner, and what appears to be a bag of groceries, and is portrayed as being harried and overworked. All of this due to 25 minutes? Really? More narrative painting. Women are overworked and men are just taking it easy, right? Oh boy. Then the last slide we'll look at focuses on social connection, and this one is truly laughable. The moderator starts by making the bold claim that women are doing a lot better than men in this area. Let me say that again. The moderator makes the bold claim that women are doing a lot better than men in this area. Keep that in mind, a lot better than men. She then makes the claim that women spend more time each week in social interactions with friends and family. They seem to be saying that this is a good thing. Women spend 40 minutes more time each week with friends and family. Wow, that's a lot of time, right? Maybe it seems like that until you divide by 7 and see the differences they're talking about boil down to a little over 5 minutes a day. So the OECD thinks that women are doing, quote, a lot better than men because they socialize with family 5 minutes a day more than men. You simply can't make this shit up. No, you really can't make that shit up. That is for certain. You know, how did this freight train of lies get going? You think back to the 1960s, when the radical feminists started off with the crap about men are pigs, men oppress women, women have been oppressed, the patriarchy, all this stuff, and the media ate it up. The media kind of echoed what they said, made it even worse, picked it up even worse, writing stories about women this and women that and ignoring the needs of men, etc., right? Then along comes academia and women's studies. Women's studies, again, echoes the same sort of ideas, same sort of lies over and over and over again. And women's studies intimidates all of academia, where everyone's afraid to say anything about or question anything that they might say, right? Oh, you totalitarian, if you can say so. And then, of course, it goes to the entertainment industry with the sitcoms going from Father Knows Best to Father's a Pest, and all the male bashing that went on with the TV, and the women are the ones who can decide easily, and the men don't know anything, and the men are stupid without the women, and all of this stuff. It just amplifies the same kinds of lies, right? And what is this funded by? It's funded by people like Ford and Rockefeller, zillions of dollars. And of course, the federal government, they jump in and they fund these lies too, to the tune of billions of dollars. Billions of dollars. And Hollywood, all the moves about female superheroes, no more male heroes, only females. And so they're all working together kind of as a team to really kind of pull this lie together from all different angles. And then you get the OECD, the multinational corporations, and I guess the OECD is kind of a nonprofit. You get them saying the same freaking thing. We're surrounded by lies. We're surrounded, folks. I mean, it's crazy. But that's the bad part. The good part is that now we know a little bit about why we're surrounded by these lies. There's been research done that's starting to help us understand how this tsunami of misinformation and omitting important facts and omitting compassion from men, how did this whole flood get started? Because it's like a flood. I mean, people have just sort of piled on and piled on and piled on until now it's like default. It's like, that's the way it is. Women are smart and men aren't so smart. Men are not as good as women. Men need to learn to be more like women. Then they'd be okay if they were. Men aren't so smart. Crazy stuff. But now we're having some ideas from research that tell us, wait a minute, something's wrong with this picture. It's called moral typecasting. Moral typecasting says that automatically people will perceive women as being victims, as being in need of services, in need of compassion. It's automatic. They don't think about it. It just happens. In fact, if women are the perpetrators, guess what happens? They still maintain this thing of compassion where people go, oh, well, she was probably abused as a child. Or she has mental health. She's depressed. She's got mental health issues. All kinds of excuses for women. Do men who break the law ever get excuses like that? No. Off with his head, right? Because men are seen as either solving the problem or the problem, right? Men are not seen as being victims. It curdles people's minds to even try and conceive of it. And they're not seen as needing compassion. When I worked with grief over the years, it was so obvious that everyone ran to the women to help, and everyone would run away from the men who had the same grief, So there's this thing about men's pain that pushes people away. So men are not seen as victims. They're not seen as deserving compassion. And they're certainly not seen as needing services, according to this whole thing called moral typecasting, which explains so much about what we've seen from the feminists and why their plight has been so easy. It's been a downhill effort for them. Everything is downhill and easy. Everyone jumps in and agrees with them, right? And it's because we have this mindset to begin with that there's something wrong with men, that men must have been oppressing women. If they say so, if enough women say that, then it must be true, right? So we're living in a world where we're surrounded by lies about this kinds of stuff. Surrounded by lies. And we need to start calling cards. We need to study up on this moral typecasting. We need to study up on precarious manhood, which is another piece of things that helps us understand why men and women are the way they are. And when we study up on it, we need to start speaking out. We need to start calling things out, because guess what? The media is not going to talk about moral typecasting because it really doesn't make them look very good. They've been writing stories about only women who are victimized for years and ignoring the men. Take domestic violence. All the stories about domestic violence are about female victims and male perpetrators. But guess what? We know now from research, it's about half and half. It's about half and half. But somehow only the stories came out about women, and here we go again. It's the moral typecasting, precarious manhood. So find out about it, start standing up and saying, no, this is bullshit. These people are full of crap. Stand up on Twitter, on Facebook, wherever you are. Stand up in the middle of your job. Tell people the truth. Because as we all know, men are good, as are you. Like, comment, subscribe, all that stuff. Come see me on Patreon. Come see me on regardingmen.com. We're doing some interesting things there too. And we'll see you. Men are good.